Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod. This week we are going to talk about something that is part of everybody's life, and I think pretty much everyone has a complex about it as well, and that is money. What does money represent? Is it survival? Is it status? Is it some kind of a complex? Does it represent self-worth, abundance, security? It's ubiquitous that people are more hesitant to talk about money with one another than they are about almost anything else, including sex. So there is something here around money that is very ambivalent. We need it, we want it, and all kinds of other things come up around it as well. So with all that said, let's dive in and go for the gold.
Deb, you started off by saying we all have a money complex. And I think that that's definitely true. I think everyone has some money complex. And what I mean is we all have, I want to say, kind of some disturbed relationship with money in some way. Each of us does. And usually this comes from our family attitudes about money and what we learned about it. I mean, I know for myself, my parents both grew up quite poor. But then, my dad found a degree of success. And so I grew up in this environment where there was both this kind of scarcity mindset and there was kind of like actual abundance. And it was always such a double message, I think, that kind of laid the groundwork for me to have my own disturbed relationship with money, which hopefully I've sorted a bit, but there's always more work to do, isn't there?
I think the way that complexes are quilts of memories is so relevant. And I'm also thinking that in many families, money is very secretive. So there's often a poverty of memories, that there's inadequate experiences of parents talking about money and value and balancing a checkbook, for instance, or many children don't know, even as adults, what their parents earn. So sometimes there's an unmediated archetype of money, which makes money seem mythic and magical because there aren't enough memories around it.
Yes, I think that's a great point. It's not spoken about freely. So it's just this tremendous mystery.
Now, that really rings true for me, too, that it's something we don't speak about in friendships as well as in families. It comes up a lot in therapy and psychoanalysis, the issue of payment. So there is something that has a faint aura of the forbidden, the things we don't talk about in polite society. And I think it was Freud who equated money with those private acts that we all engage in the bathroom.
That's right. That, what was it? Constipation was related to being a miser, money grubbing personality, or somebody who holds things back all the time versus letting things flow out of us, flow through us. What I was thinking about, Deb, when you said that, is I was raised in a very blue collar Long Island, New York home where the cost of things was something that was talked about all the time. That every time we went shopping, you came home and the first question was, did you get a bargain? And so you come back and you're like, I was at Lord & Taylor and I got a shirt for like 75% off. And then you have to wear it and then everybody's amazed because it was 75% off and it was only like $8. And that was totally normal for me. And then I moved down to the South, and I'm there in like Charlottesville, Virginia, I'm meeting people. I'm like, oh, look at that couch. You know what I paid for that couch? And people were horrified. People were horrified. This horrible sense of shame would creep in the room. The people were so horrified, they wouldn't tell me that what I was doing was inappropriate.
Yeah.
But it goes to that strange, like ghostly, forbidden topic that you were saying, Deb.
Well, and also cultural differences. I mean, I think I told the story on a previous podcast, but I remember Joseph showing up to training, and I'd gotten some like designer pair of shoes for like I don't know, $15 or something, and you were like, "Oh, I like your shoes." I'm like, "They were like $15," and you're like,
Totally
"Oh
get
my
it.
God, that's great!"
Like I would get a hotel room in Philly, and I was like, "You wouldn't believe what a bargain I got for that."
Right? Yes. Every month we would get a report on what your hotel room cost. It was awesome.
It was awful. It was awesome.
We were,
It
like,
was
reveling in it, reveling in the bargain. But you're right. That's more of like a Northeast thing than other parts of the country. So,
although it's not a Yankee thing. The Yankee thing is, people would know that the so-and-sos were really very, very well off. They would have a very nice house, but people would wear kind of worn clothing, good brands, but worn. You drive kind of a beat-up Volvo. It's a good car, but it's already 11 years old. There's a funny kind of convention around that for a Yankee mentality. You don't flaunt it, and you would never, ever talk about how much you paid for something.
Okay. There's this kind of ambivalence, right? Because I think most of us want money, but it's kind of gauche to admit that, right? So you're supposed to want it, but not want it. And then if you have it, you kind of want other people to know that you have it, but you don't want to flaunt it. So there's a way that there's so much in the shadow about money.
Mm-hmm.
So much of what we think and feel about money is in the shadow.
It's such a powerful symbol, really, of so many things. It's not just what it is. I mean, nobody would talk about their tomato soup complex. Tomato soup is just tomato soup. It's just what it is. Whereas money represents all kinds of things in the psyche. And I think it can be such a repository for self-worth. It can be status, and also a source of shame.
I think there's so much shame about money. There's shame about having it. There's shame about not having it. There's shame about wanting it. There's shame about talking about it. There's shame about how you got it. It's so wrapped up. I mean, I think what we're edging into is that money is an archetype, and it's hugely symbolic.
Mm-hmm.
And part of I think we can talk about lots of different ways that it's symbolic, but I always find that it's useful to think about money as a symbol for our life energy. So when we buy something, we think about trading a certain amount of our life energy for something. And how does that feel? When money shows up in dreams, I usually try to kind of make that switch, and it usually works really well. Our feelings about money, if we think about how we feel about our life energy in that context, it often can open up layers of meaning.
And I think offering these various new ways of thinking about what money means begins to allow something to flow. Not just the ideas around money, but often people's capacity to earn or even ask for a raise,
Mm-hmm.
or evaluate what they think they need or what they deserve begins to open up when it's free of some of the old, rigid, inadequate ways of thinking about it. One of the things I'm sure we'll get to is the idea of archetypal healing, that when we have a complex that's really not functioning well for us, we know that at the center of the complex is an archetype, which is much larger, more varied, and more creative than the way we've been thinking about it. When we can consider the archetype and invoke it in a way, all of a sudden energy begins to flow when we can universalize something. And then we can reclaim it on a personal level once we have that expanded sense of it. So I remember once, Lisa, you and I were talking about the ancient religious relationship to coins and the idea of money. I think you mentioned something about the Temple of Juno, Juno Moneta, which is where the word money comes from.
Yes. So, first of all, in the beginning in ancient Greece, in Athens, for example, the coins were usually stamped with the image of a god or goddess or other revered element. And it was sacred. It was minted in temples. It was, completely connected with the spiritual life as well as with commerce. And in fact, the word money comes from this event that happened in Rome. There were the Gauls were sneaking into Rome to attack the city, and the geese honking awoke the guards. And geese are symbols of the goddess of warning, and that is Moneta. So the Romans built a temple to Moneta, and that's where they made their money. So the words money and mint both come out of that story and that temple.
There's also that religious component around money that we still have on a dollar bill, in God we trust. And there's a sense that there is an agreement in all forms of money, that you can go to the store and give this piece of paper or a coin, which actually may be minted with not valuable metals at this point, and there is a trusted, established agreement that this is worth exchanging something for. And in that early time, the guarantor of the sacred agreement was the divine.
Right. And it, in the beginning, coins, of course, were made from valuable metals, which were kind of a gift of God, right? I mean, gold, the Aztecs believed it was the excrement of the sun, so that these precious metals were connected with the sacred. But Joseph, you're talking about how it's this kind of contract. So we went from gold coins or silver coins to then we had the gold standard, right? Paper money was backed by precious metals, and then we did away with that. And then it was paper money, and then it was plastic. And now it's just little bits that move across computer screens. When I transfer money into my account, it's just, I don't know, it just goes over the internet. It's sort of like magic. And it's really amazing that we're not really talking about anything that has a physical form anymore.
It's been translated fully into spirit. And the question is, with even the emergence of cryptocurrency, who is the guarantor of the agreement? And for instance, in this idea of currency exchange, because you can buy and sell currency as it goes up and down in the currency markets, a currency often is only worth something because the government that backs it is a viable guarantor of its value. So this idea of a larger authority, which sanctions what currency particularly means, is part of the archetype.
I think that is absolutely critically important, that one way or another, we've all come to agree that this is valuable. And if I go back down to coins being made out of silver or gold, it's interesting that is a commonly agreed value. But even if I had a bucket full of gold coins, I can't eat them. They won't heat my house. So we've moved so far away from the barter system where I can exchange 2 of my sheep for 1 of your cows or something like that. And we have something of concrete, tangible value. And I'm thinking too about coins and the concreteness of being able to get your hands on something versus what we do with online banking is numbers on a computer screen. And I'm remembering our eldest granddaughter who went through a big money stage, and kids do. And she had this big pouch with a zip top, and she had her money in there. And it was almost all coins. And I bet it weighed well over 5 pounds. What mattered to her was that she could see it and touch it and heft it. and dig around in there. It needed to be concrete. And then, of course, as she grew and as we all live in this culture, it's very, very far from concrete. And yet it still carries this kind of archetypal potency of I have this amount of money in my checking account or my savings account.
That's a great point about gold coins, Deb, is that we may all agree that they're valuable, but she can't do anything with them. And the first kind of currency, really, or not currency, but the oldest form of money apparently was cattle, which was something that you could trade, but it was also something that you could eat, that had real value. But gold, it's another example of how this is so symbolic, right? I mean, gold has many properties that make it valuable, like it is workable at relatively low temperatures and it doesn't erode, but a lot of it's beautiful, right? And the fact that it doesn't erode makes it symbolically potent because it doesn't degrade. It feels like something of enduring value. And we know that from an archetypal level, we relate that to the self.
I think that that language that it does not erode seems really, really significant, that it has an eternal property. And also the gold is rare. And there's something in the psyche that is attracted to rareness. Like even these kind of incredulous prices people will pay for a wrongly minted coin that has Lincoln's face in the wrong direction, and how just because of its rareness it becomes this massively perceived valuable object. But I did want to also jump back, Deb, because you were saying something about the movement of concrete bartering in money to this very mercurial idea that spins through the ethers. And there's a way in which the evolution from bartering to currency, I think, underlies the evolution of civilization itself. Because how many chickens could you get in payment? And what about all the other things, just like a house full of chickens? That we need so many different things that we probably would have to spend all our time trying to fashion or to locate other people to barter with, that all the nuanced, aesthetic, and rarefied parts of cultural development would have been impeded at the very least, if not blocked totally.
Sure. I mean, currency is critical for exchange and also for, hold on a second, Paul, give me a second, specialization. So, and it absolutely, in that sense, kind of preceded the development of refined culture.
That's such an interesting point, that it facilitates trade and an urban kind of civilization, because it's going to get to be pretty cumbersome. If I have to somehow tote my 12 chickens over to your place in order to get a cow, it certainly makes things much more rapid. And yet it has evolved into something else. And I'm thinking back to the coins that were originally of gold or precious metal. And I wonder if our connection to money is also really very existential.
Mm-hmm.
That it is our security. I'm safe now. I have X amount of money and I have a kind of stability, and that we don't want our lives to erode.
Well, I think it is really related to the mother archetype, that which provides, and just the way that the earth provides cattle or gold for that matter. There's a sense of trusting, being, if you have a sort of positive mother complex, there's a basic trust that the world will take care of you, that there will be enough. And of course, material or materialism, the root word is mater, mother in Latin. So our relationship with money, I think, is very existential. And I think it relates to the principle of life-giving, caregiving, nurturing, And so, it's an interesting thing to ponder. And I think I have a tentative answer on this. Is your relationship with money in part governed by the quality of your mother complex? And I would say yes.
Imagine that in a couple of different ways. What are you thinking?
I think if you have a generally positive mother complex, you have a mother who you felt pretty connected to, and she was a steady attachment figure, and she met your needs. She mirrored you. She was, mostly available, not perfect, but sort of good enough. That you grow up with a certain amount of trust that the world is going to be a friendly place, that you will be welcomed and well met, that people will like you, and that things will go your way at least part of the time, and that you will have enough, and that you're not necessarily operating from a kind of mentality of scarcity, but more from a mentality of trust.
I can understand that, but that can also contribute to the puer or puella situation where people kind of move through life, don't make sound decisions, or avoid toilsome obligations because they feel that, the great mother will drop things into their lap. Sometimes that can work. But I do think that maybe we're talking about a sense of reasonable entitlement, which is such a charged word, but just entitled to ask your boss for a raise, or
I want to say sometimes deservedness works better than entitlement because entitlement is so charged. A sense of a kind of healthy sense of deservedness.
I like that better.
I think you're exactly right, Joseph. Keep going.
So if we have this deservedness that when I'm hungry, I can go and ask for lunch from mom.
Exactly.
But I can, at the very least, ask what I need. I can pursue what I need with an expectation that life will meet me in a friendly way. But I will often have to ask. I will have to pursue and request. Even the child will move towards the breast and want it to respond. They'll take action.
Even in that word deservedness, it implies exchange, that I have somehow earned it. I have earned the right to that breast or earned the right to lunch. Do you deserve it? Have you earned it? And so I'm thinking that this archetype of exchange, starting with bartering, I do this for you and then you do that for me, it is really embedded deep in the psyche, and it is part of our trajectory as we grow up. The infant is entitled and wants, but as we separate, we start to get that if I do this for you, then you will do that for me.
Yeah.
And it has to do with fairness. Wait a minute, I did this and this for you, and now you won't do that for me, and that's not fair. It hasn't been an even exchange of favors or toys or whatever the child might be starting to.
And we know from primate studies that a sense of fairness is actually innate, you know? I want to go back to this idea about the mother complex because, Joseph, I think you were edging me in this other direction. I think there's a way that our relationship with money might be governed by the mother complex, but I think it's also governed by the father complex. The nature of our relationship with our father will often dictate how we move out into the world, especially as relates to career. So do we feel empowered to kind of go after what we want? Do we have the kind of forward momentum to make things happen? Do we believe in ourselves? Do we allow ourselves to have a vision that then we can try to manifest? And that part, that sort of earning money, I think is often governed by the father.
Right. And I can imagine a nice dance between those, because if I've got that fatherly blessing to go out in the world and seek, it's the memory of the mother that says that when I arrive, people will meet me well. They'll meet with a friendliness, or at least a welcomingness into whatever that next stage might be. And that both energies are needed, perhaps, to have a successful relationship to earning.
I think what we're saying here is that money is the vehicle that allows us to incarnate our dreams. To go out in the world and to do something and get value in return for it. of if I want a new bicycle, I can deliver X number of newspapers or some such thing until I have enough of that symbol money to get the bike. But I can take an idea, a desire, a dream, and incarnate it thanks to money.
Yeah, kind of manifest it in space and time.
Exactly.
Take it from this image or imagination into material reality. And there's a kind of magic in that.
It's a concretizing principle.
That's great. Yeah.
And I think in a way it reminds me of the god Hermes or Mercury, who could traverse the realms. He could go from Mount Olympus to Earth and down into Hades. And the money has that same kind of quality of traversing the realms, and it's mercurial. It's our friend and our benefactor, and it can be a demon and a difficulty as well. It has both sides. The quality of archetypal kinds of characteristics.
Yeah, and it has a tricksterish quality to it, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Just like Hermes.
I wanted to come back to the idea of concretizing and the way that money really holds the soul to the world by making the imagination even possible, and how when people are deprived of adequate money, that the soul retreats and stays in an imaginal world where all the things that I cannot seem to make real live in a dreamy place. And I live a kind of provisional life. So money and the possibility of money keeps us in relationships with our feet on the ground, assessing the world and assessing for opportunities to possibilize our imagination.
Joseph, that's such a great point. And what it brings up for me is this fairy tale image of the little match girl, which is such a poignant image of real psychological poverty and poverty itself too, actual poverty. And if you remember the story, she comes from this desperately poor family. It's Christmas Eve. It's bitterly cold outside. Her father cruelly sends her out in the bitter cold to try to sell matches. No one's buying her matches. And she's, what you get is that she's slowly freezing to death. So she starts lighting the matches. And when she lights the match, she sees these incredible images of families gathered around the fireplace, feasting and sharing gifts. But the image only lasts as long as the match stays lit. And of course, every match she lights is a match she won't be able to sell. So she's burning through her resources. There it is in her imagination, but it's not possible to concretize. So it just exists in this kind of numbing fantasy that she'll never be able to access. And that there is a way that some of us wind up relating to money like that.
And that because she was orphaned, she's in this difficult situation, deprived of access to the father and mother principles, the life remains discarnate.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And yet is comforting in that visionary form.
Well, it has to do, she, if I recall correctly, she does not have a mother, and the father is harsh. So that may loop us back to what you were saying, Lisa, about the mother complex and the mother principle, a sense of nurturing and the one who provides.
And like enoughness.
Enoughness. Yeah. Exactly. And it also illustrates that story so poignantly, the kind of distress and despair that can go along with not having enough money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How will I live?
Mm-hmm. That is such a frightening place to be in. And kind of that sense of like, what will become of me?
Yes.
I'm just thinking about how often money shows up in one way or another in the consulting room. And I was hoping that we could take a couple of minutes and just talk about a couple different configurations. And I'm thinking about the person who has a relationship with money whereby no matter what he does, there's never enough, and he's always working 3 jobs. And maybe he's a very talented person with an advanced degree, but for some reason, he just kind of can't get over that hump, and nothing ever quite works. And in spite of very, very hard work, somehow there's never enough.
I think in those situations, as we dig down, which often is not embedded in the actual work situation, but we dig down to really early childhood stories, the idea of asking for what is needed or asking for more than what is needed in order to bring forward a new vision in one's life, once again feels shameful and transgressive. There's some kind of a story of stop asking, or you're asking too much, or there's a narcissistic caregiver somewhere in the story who's punishing a child because they just keep asking for more than the parent feels comfortable providing or even engaging.
Right. So you get this embedded belief that expecting the universe to give you what you need is transgressive or not allowed, or that you'll be punished for it.
Right. It's encoded or coated with anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
That something bad is going to happen if I were to ask for what I need or want. And that evokes enough anxiety that I'm not even allowed to know what I need or want.
I think the expectation is, and it needs to be titrated for a child, you, whoever the you is, ought to be more self-sufficient now. You ought to have enough money from your allowance or from odd jobs that you do around the house to buy that special treat that you want. And so it goes into the depriving parent who may be very harsh and shaming about this. Oh, that you're not self-sufficient, you're not effective in the world, you can't manifest the means to satisfy your desires. And then there's the indulgent parent of, oh, sure, whatever you want, you can have it without earning it. And somewhere between those two extremes of depriving and indulgence is a sense of efficacy. And I think that's very much tied up with our money complex, that if I were doing well with myself and in the world and had my feet on the ground, I, quote, should, unquote, be able to buy, fill in the blank. So I think it's very much tied in with our sense of independence and self-sufficiency. And it's not always true, of course, but I think in the psyche, it's linked to those things.
I want to kind of maybe create another picture of how a money complex might manifest. And I think it's sort of related a little bit to what you've both been saying. Joseph, when you were talking about sort of anxiety, I mean, I think there's a way that our relationship with money says a lot about how big we get to be in the world. And, being big makes us feel vulnerable. And there is a certain kind of money complex that shows up where we feel safe being small. And that can look like, even if we have plenty of money, we kind of never let ourselves act like we do. And we may choose always to kind of play it very safe. We might focus a lot on saving money and, making sure that we are getting a bargain or shopping at the discount stores, when really maybe that's not something we need to be concerned with. But it soothes our anxiety, and in a way it kind of keeps us small. So if given the choice between a big house and a small house, even if we can afford the big house, we pick the small house. Given the choice between a fancy car and a not so fancy car, even if we could afford the fancy car, we pick the not so fancy car. And not that it's wrong to make those choices, it's obviously not. But if it's driven by a desire to stay small so that the gods don't smite us,
Yeah,
I think that can be just sort of a global personality trait that gets expressed through the money complex.
that is really, really powerful, Lisa. It is, and there's all kinds of stories in mythology that, God forbid, a woman brags that she's beautiful and then Venus comes down and blights her, Or somebody tries to attain Mount Olympus and then, the gods strike them and, throw them down and break their legs off. I mean, there is a very scary archetypal realm of reaching beyond in a way that is deeply visible and gets the attention of these overwhelming forces.
And not to mention provoking the envy of one's neighbors, in addition to the anger of the gods. But if you're too big for your britches, the neighbors may make you feel it.
And it's true, envy is a real thing, and hubris is a real thing. And we have to watch out for both of those forces. But at the same time, it denies the life force if we stay too small, if we stay smaller than our destiny intended us to be. So I've certainly seen that kind of image. I'm thinking about, Joseph, you brought this up before, a kind of puella, kind of eternal child attitude toward money, which is, I don't really need to worry about it. It's just going to come to me. I'm not going to worry about it. Somehow it'll just magically happen. The truth is that it often don't work out so good. Those kinds of attitudes, that's a little different than sort of having that secure foundation that makes you feel generally optimistic. The puella, it's a little bit castle in the sky, and often eventually kind of comes crashing down.
Yes, because it doesn't have enough concretizing energy around it, that people will start out on ventures without an adequate business plan or without adequate capital, imagining that somehow magically the venture is going to attract some beneficent forces, only to find that what little they had kind of collapses into the dust. So there's something about having one's hand on a vision and imaginal battery, and the other hand has to be firmly grabbing the soil and assessing, what are the resources that are necessary to bring this forward. And one of the ways that I see that, particularly in some of the young men that I work with, is not only do they have a goal, but they feel lusty about it. And there's something about that kind of stallion-like, galloping forward to the goal, that they're really in their body and they're hungry for it and they're a little bit full of piss and vinegar, but they're really scanning the environment for the opportunity to bring it forward, and not just kind of, being a lotus eater, in the Odyssey.
So I'm kind of going back to what you said about staying small, Lisa, and versus sort of stretching our wings. But on the other hand, we can get too ungrounded and fly too high with our, supposedly brilliant idea that doesn't have that masculine lustiness that you mentioned, Joseph, in it. And then it makes me think about Icarus, who had wings that were glued to him with wax, and they were escaping from prison. And his father, Daedalus, the craftsman, told him not to fly too high, or the sun would melt the wax in his wings. But neither should he fly too low, lest the damp and the fog also make him crash to earth. And so finding that middle path, as ever, is part of life.
Another amplification of what we're talking about, I think, is Jack and the Beanstalk, which I actually love this part of the story, because if you recall, Jack is sort of a ne'er-do-well who doesn't help out. And he lives with his mom, and they're very poor, and the cow stops giving milk. Now, there's an image of lack of psychic poverty, of a lack of maternal warmth. The cow is not giving milk anymore. So mom says, Jack, take the cow to the market and get as much money for her as you can. And the thing, if you think about that, is a cow that's giving milk, it gives every day. It goes on, right? It continues to give. Once the cow stops giving milk, you can sell it for, I guess for meat, and then that's it. It doesn't give anymore, right? So this is the end of the line, the money that they're going to get from selling this cow. So as you will likely remember, Jack doesn't get to market. He's met by a funny old man on his way there. And the man says, are you going to sell that cow? And Jack says, yes. He goes, I will give you 5 magic beans. And I have to tell you, I had a version of this storybook when I was a kid, and the beans were so beautiful in the illustration. I can still see them. So Jack says, great, 5 magic beans. So that's that sense of just having a big vision. Oh my God, magic beans. This is great. This kind of lofty, inflated, maybe even hubristic vision of something. Feeling very big and very bold and very unafraid. Jack says, you got it. So he takes the beans back to his mom, who of course is horrified that this is all he's got. She's got no imagination. Jack is all imagination. She is all, hard work. And she says, you foolish boy. And then she throws the beans out the window. Now, the family never would have got the beans if Jack hadn't been so full of beans, right, to have this big vision. But the beans never would have taken root if not for the mother's grounded practicality. And of course, in the morning, this beanstalk grows up to the sky. And I wanted to say one more thing, because as you'll recall, one of the gifts that they get at the end is the hen who lays a golden egg. So we're back to this image of kind of inexhaustible supply, but it's even better because it's a golden egg every day. Okay. Joseph, you looked like you wanted to say something.
Well, I was thinking about the role of the mother's aggression. That had she not thrown the beans out the window and just cooked them, that she would have killed them.
Right.
And I also think about times both you and Deb have talked about the frog prince, that if she hadn't thrown the frog against the wall, it wouldn't have been released and freed into this other form that the psyche needed. So there is something about the airiness of the puer and the dynamism of aggression that have to find a way, which again, I think of as lustiness, but have to find a kind of way together so that there's some striking event happens in the psyche, which then makes something germinate.
That's great.
And so money and aggression, or really abundance and aggression, because we're in that realm of abundance and aggression and fire and this embracing of the heroic journey of hard work or the attainment of vision for one's life. It all takes a certain amount of heat versus kind of airiness of just dreaming.
And I'm wondering, because I'm thinking some of our listeners might have one of these many difficult relationships with money. So many of us have a disturbed relationship with money in one way or another. How can we work with that? How can we shift that and change that?
Well, I think we're in the realm of finding a philosophic position, a thinking position, an attitude that allows energy to flow again. That the old attitude regarding money, abundance, scarcity, or flourishing, and all those nuances around it, the story is not large enough or fluid enough.
That we might be being held back by shame or a lack of deservedness. And those are things that are difficult to work with, but they're not impossible to work with.
So one of the discourses that we're seeing very much in the culture is this income divide, that the abundance seems to be rising up to this elite, the oligarchy, the idea of the tip top of the pyramid, and this impoverished, suffering multitude is down there at the bottom. And this income divide is really, really in the conversation an awful lot. And I think a very critical quest for how to think about abundance and the acquisition of wealth in such a way that it does not do damage to the rest of the community.
Well, it seems that with the proverbial 1% and the 99%, that what has happened is a separation from the sense of agency that is so much a part of the American dream. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and hard work will get you anywhere. And that this kind of shifts it into another realm, which is the cards are stacked against me. It's a rigged game. And I'm kind of going back to how do we work with someone who has a disturbed relationship with money, which is probably pretty universal to some extent in all of us. And I'm thinking about how to recover that sense of agency. What is it that that person wants to do or needs to do in the world, of the part that is grounded and practical and even aggressive, like Jack's mother, combined with the qualities that Jack had but I think they are magic beans, of finding our way through that to a place where we have a sense of abundance being within our grasp.
I really appreciate what you are both saying. And I think that, it's, Joseph, you've sort of lifted it, into this really important place. I mean, we can talk about the archetype of money and our personal relationship with money. And our relationship with money happens very much in this larger context. And there is a lot of income inequality in the United States anyway these days. And it is a fact that in many ways, if you are below a certain threshold, the game is rigged against you in many ways. And what are the ethics of pursuing abundance when many people don't have enough? I think that these are really complicated questions, and I don't know that we're going to have answers to them. But it does show this intermingling between these different levels, right? Because there certainly is an inner relationship here that we've mostly spent our time talking about. What is your relationship with deservedness? What is your relationship with money? What is your relationship with agency? How does this relate to your personal story, the way you were with your mother, the way you were with your father? And then there's this larger societal context that's important as well. And how do those things interact one with the other?
Well, and I think they really do, because if people have inherited a rapacious feeling around money, that for me to have money means I have to take it from someone else, or if that's the attitude that somehow they think about as they're surrounding this idea of money, it's very hard to then move forward, if particularly if we have any sense of empathy inside of ourselves. So in that situation, often there needs to be a philosophic expansion. For instance, that we could imagine that abundance could be created without generating scarcity for another person. I mean, that's an incredible task.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to be clear that I think this is true for all of us. Abundance is not the same thing as, lots and lots of money in the bank. And that takes us into the realm of, how do we work with someone psychotherapeutically, of where is your interiority? What are your personal values? What does it mean to you to live truly well? And how much of that is correlated with money? And how much of that is about something else?
And I think that brings us right back to where we were in the beginning, that money is an archetype and it's a symbol. And yes, we need enough to live. But in the end, it's also about something else.
We've often talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there's a great truth to it, that when our physical needs are not met, we don't have enough food or literally water, or we're not warm enough, and our security needs aren't met, that we don't have enough money or resources to feel or be fundamentally safe, self-actualization really is often out of reach. So money and the ability to meet one's fundamental needs and progressive needs does in fact serve a capacity to actualize. And they do seem to go hand in hand.
I'm aware that we referenced quickly money and shadow in the beginning of the podcast, but I wonder if it makes sense to just talk a little bit more about that. The kinds of things that can be in the shadow about money are our desire for money. We may feel ashamed that we desire money. Money can be very shadowy in that we may do things in order to earn money that are unsavory in some way. And we need to just kind of disremember that. You know, there's that idea of dirty money.
Filthy lucre.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there is an also idealization of poverty. I mean, I was raised Catholic, and the valorization of poverty made the wealthy seem very suspicious.
It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven.
So that stuff can get wound into our psyches in a way that creates just a lot of internal conflict.
I think we have touched on shame and envy.
And greed, right? I mean, greed is a huge problem that governs our relationship with the planet.
And that greed is often a substitute for a lack on a deeper level, which I think we were hedging towards with some of the other conversations. Whether it's somebody who is dangerously obese, feeling an endless hunger for certain foods, and bringing up the question of, is that what one is really greedy for? Or somebody who has more money than they could possibly spend in several lifetimes, but still focus singularly upon the acquisition of more dollars showing up in the bank account, to the detriment perhaps of other things and developments that they could be interested in. It begins to feel like a substitute.
And it can be a power mechanism.
Ah, yes.
We wield power over other people. I'm thinking about our friend Ebenezer Scrooge, who used his money, at least at the beginning of the story, to make poor Bob Cratchit more miserable than he already was.
And sometimes when we feel very unsafe over the course of the life, we can realize that money can be used rather successfully to create a tremendous barrier against discomfort, that we can actually purchase systems and assistance and environments where we are very minimally challenged to be uncomfortable. And that can be driven often by an infant fantasy. You know, sometimes you hear people, this is probably a little less so now, but I remember years ago where people would say, God, if I won the lottery, I wouldn't lift a finger. And what you hear in that is like, so what, you're just going to imagine that this entire staff of people are going to just do everything for you. And then what are you going to be doing? And often it's a rather young, infantile image of just kind of laying around being pampered. And that can be very cripplingly seductive for people.
Building on what you said, Joseph, money can also separate us to our detriment from the collective, from our neighbors, from the community. That there's a huge distance, between those who live on the castle, on the hill. The neighbors, way down below. I'm thinking about some of those paintings by people like Bruegel, tilling the fields and herding the sheep. We need to be connected to the greater whole, and money can insulate us from that as we climb aboard our yacht and live isolated from the collective. I'm thinking about the story of the Buddha who was raised in the castle, and his father wanted him to be protected from the ugly realities of life. And of course, it worked the other way around for the Buddha. He went out instead. But I think we get disconnected from a greater whole to our detriment.
I'm thinking that sometimes the shield of money can prevent us from adapting accurately to life. I think of that famous story of Howard Hughes. And then after he died, they discovered like a warehouse full of his urine that he'd been keeping in jars.
No.
Yeah, it's a true story. But, this buffer from reality can also allow strange and unhealthy fantasies to take root or to be funded or tolerated.
So we move away from the reality principle here in these instances.
Or that's a danger if we're not grounded.
And that does bring up this myth of Midas, doesn't it? Kind of moving away from the reality principle, which I think that myth is incredibly well known. He was granted a wish, I believe, and it was his wish that was everything that he touched would turn into gold, which was great until it came time to eat. And then his daughter came up to him. He couldn't eat or drink because everything he touched turned to gold. And as Deb pointed out earlier, you can't eat gold. And then when his daughter came up to him, he touched her and she turned into gold.
So that lack of reality principle.
Yeah, and then you really are terribly isolated from everyone and everything. By the way, there's a really wonderful book called The Midas Complex by Aaron Kipnis. Yeah, he's a professor at Pacifica, and he's not an analyst, but he is influenced by archetypal psychology, and it's a really great book.
I would also like to highlight James Hillman's book, Soul of Money. They'll be in the references for the show notes.
I'd also like to bring up before we finish that we've had a number of conversations with some entrepreneurs and some real movers and shakers in this realm of reimagining the new economy. There's an awful lot to be said about that. And the listeners may want to look for a short podcast series we did called Myths, Morals, and Money, which was a larger conversation around this. But in this socio-political dialogue and the idea of being part of a global community that is tending to itself, one of the takeaways that I held is that the problem in the culture right now is not about money, but that people who have tremendous amounts of money have often abdicated its use to the imaginations of others, and that many of the systems that generate wealth or multi-generational wealth can sometimes be nefarious and run on principles that the heirs to the fortune might be shocked to find out. How are these various banks generating this rather remarkable return that I'm not even aware of? And in that way, the people who actually own and control the money, their imaginations are not really involved in how that money is generating things in the world. So one of the pieces of work might be for any of us, regardless of how much money we have, to become interested in re-tethering it to our own imaginations, which goes back to the idea of individuation, that each of us is tasked to bring something forward in the world through us. And that is, for me, perhaps the most important endeavor to fund, to trust that there is something generative beyond measure, often in funding where your soul wants to go, rather than abdicating that or farming that out.
Oh, Joseph, that's really great. What a great summation. Yeah. So I think that is a great place to switch to a dream.
Hi, this is Joseph from This Jungian Life podcast. Lisa, Deb, and I have been deeply moved by your responses to our work. Producing, editing, and distributing it involves substantial expenses, and now we need your help. Please stop by our website, thisjungianlife.com, and click on the heading Be Our Patron. You'll be redirected to our Patreon funding page. Patreon helps creators connect with people who believe in projects like ours. There, you can sign up with your credit card to support us with as little as $1 a month. And at higher levels of support, we'll provide special episodes, behind-the-scenes photos and stories, and a chance to join a select pool of listeners for dream interpretations. Thank you. The dreamer is a 27-year-old male and currently is an counselor intern. And here is his dream. I found myself walking down a street in a European-like town until I came upon a group of my peers. One of them proclaimed that the book we had all been searching for was in a bookstore ahead, and that she was intent on finding it. As I was also intent on finding this book, I went on ahead. The bookstore was, in fact, 9 bookstores located in a 3-story building with 3 stores on each floor. I alone entered the middle bookstore on the 2nd floor and asked the attendant if she had any special books related to psychoanalysis. After pondering a moment, slightly confused at my request, she remembered that she did have a special book enclosed in a wooden box. It was the book I had been searching for. Decorative and ancient-looking, I purchased it for $45, thrilled and excited. I met back with my peers in the library, all of whom were perturbed and annoyed that I was the one who found the book. "I told you about it, and then you go and take it for yourself," one said angrily. I set the book on the table and told them that they're welcome to check it out as long as they're careful and respectful with it. They all seemed appeased by this motion, yet still slightly bitter, and treated the book with care. Soon after, a famous relationship therapist called my name, asking for my opinion on a matter. I felt shocked that someone of such renown would consider my opinion on anything. She was holding 2 pictures, one clearly of a bridge, the other obscure. Through analysis of the key symbols and images in each picture, we discovered that it was an image of the same bridge, taken at different angles. And just a bit of context, the dreamer says that they recently graduated with a master's degree in counseling, and they're moving to a new city to begin their career in a few weeks. They've been reading lots of books on Jungian analysis and hope to become an analyst one day. And in the dream, they were feeling excited and hopeful.
So, really interesting images in this dream.
I found the section with the 9 bookstores on 3 locations and 3 stores in each floor, and the numerical precision of it all to be compelling and a little stunning on a certain level.
Well, and of course he goes into, I mean, if you have a grid, 3x3 grid, there is a center, right? There's one store that would be right in the center, and that's where he finds the book. I'm going to just kind of take a quick gloss, and then, there's a warning in this dream about hubris. Because some part of the psyche, a feminine part of the psyche, so maybe something like an anima, is aware of this important knowledge, but it's the ego who arrogates that. It's the ego who goes and takes it for itself. And these other parts of the psyche are somewhat appeased by, well, you can look at it too, but there's still some bitterness there. It's a little bit like there is some really valuable knowledge, and the ego has to be careful that it acknowledges its dependence on the unconscious, that it doesn't take it for, it's a little bit of a kind of sorcerer's apprentice kind of field that we're in, I think. Be careful. It's often it is the apprentice who learns a little bit and thinks he now has the way to control the magical force. That can be a little bit dangerous. And then this relationship counselor calls and wants to know his opinion. I'm trying to remember. I think the relationship therapist is female. Do we know?
Yes,
Yes.
I think it was.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. And she wants to know his opinion, and it's kind of shocking. And again, it's an image that has a certain amount of hubris in it. I think the fact that it ends with an image of a bridge is really important. It's not a bad thing to feel really ambitious and inflated. And in fact, I'm going to say this. I think just about every person that I've ever seen step forward to apply for analytic training has been inflated at one point or another. I see this with the seminar that we run in Philadelphia, that people come into the seminar and they're excited about Jung, and you can see it. They get inflated with these ideas and how beautiful these ideas are. And you can just see it. They get full of energy. They sometimes talk too much. It's not a fun thing to be around, but I always recognize it as something that ultimately is in pursuit of wholeness and growth. It's almost like a stage that people pass through as they start taking on board some of these ideas. And I can imagine that this dreamer might be in kind of that space of, wow, I have found the key. I have found the hidden secret knowledge. And I think the fact that it ends with this renowned relationship therapist, he's a relationship therapist. So it's about being related, and that there are these bridges, and bridges connect things, is a positive sign that this dreamer is going to be able to kind of cross over and take this wonderful inflated energy and kind of ground it eventually.
I also noticed all the 3s and the 9s in this dream, and there are 3 female characters in the dream to our male protagonist, as it were, the dream ego, on his adventure and his quest. And I would use the word enthused. I would substitute that for inflated, of just, and enthusiasm means something like filled with the energy of the gods. That is kind of how we get into Jungian training at some point. So we have these 3 women. First one is the dream ego's friend, who also wants the book. The second one is the person in the bookstore who helps him find the book, and she has it enclosed in a wooden box. And then the third one is the relationship therapist. So we have these 3 images that are sort of countervailing to what the dream ego is so always very busy doing. And then we have the bookstore had 9 stores located in a 3-story building with 3 stores on each floor. And the book that he purchases is $45, which is a number that's divisible by 9. And I got really curious about what is it with 9? And I'm not a numerologist by any stretch of the imagination. There is certainly the magnified sacred 3, 9 pins in bowling, Stitch in Time saves 9. I think in Norse mythology, Odin hung on a tree for 9 days. So there's an empowerment, an empowered 3. It's magnified, and we have the 3 female characters as well in the dream. So what do I make of this? That there's a tremendous amount of energy going on here, a huge amount of energy in the psyche. And the dreamer says that he just graduated with his master's degree in counseling, and he's moving to a new city. And he's interested in pursuing Jungian thought and maybe analysis. I think I really feel this is such a hopeful dream with this forward-moving energy. And then at the end of the dream, the relationship therapist shows him images of a bridge. And I think of a bridge as that which connects consciousness with the unconscious. Those are the two important areas of the psyche that need to be bridged.
I think that all really rings solidly in the dream. Just adding a bit more jargon, the male figure in the dream represents the ego of the dreamer. There's an internal community of figures and people, and there's a particular woman in the dream who I think is a classic anima figure, because the anima is the linking function. She is the bridge, and she's the bridge in all of us. So she's the one who creates the bridge between the ego and this resource, the secret book. And then once he gets a sense of her ability to locate it, then the ego just kind of races off by itself and doesn't bring the anima with it on the journey. So I'm thinking about what that would look like in someone's psyche. It might be that the approach towards the sacred book, which we might imagine is the collected works of Jung, perhaps, that if one doesn't...
$45, though.
It is more than $45. That if one doesn't bring the anima on the journey, that there'll have to be a correction at some point. That, quite frankly, you probably can't get through analytic training if it's only fueled by the ego.
Oh, you definitely can't.
That we need the resources of the soul, of the anima, even just to survive the training, because it's so tiring and so much is required and so much has to be mined from the secret bookstores inside of us in order to be able to slog through those years of training. So the relationship therapist, as Deb said, comes back restoring relationships. I'm imagining that's Esther Perel, by the way, and bringing this forward and redirecting him to not forget this, but still he doesn't associate the bridge with the woman who helped him. So to me, if in my fantasy, if the dream were dreamed forward, maybe the next step would be that, oh, the bridge and my friend, that woman, might have some relationship, as well as the therapist. They're all in the category of bridging, which is so essential.
Yeah.
You've been listening to This Jungian Life. From our website, thisjungianlife.com, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, help us produce future episodes by funding us through Patreon, and submit your dreams for possible interpretation on another episode. We'd like to thank our listener who shared a dream for today's show and hope you'll let us know what topics you'd enjoy hearing more about. Until next time, keep living this Jungian life.